Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek and the leader of the Reach Movement team. And we're building a movement of churches that are growing and multiplying. But how do you grow and multiply in the current mission field of COVID-19? We're on our third and final, at least for now, webinar about how to be and do church different in a different kind of world. Over the last 7 years of leading the Reach team, I've had the opportunity to get to know some pretty amazing pastors and church leaders and consultants. And we pulled them together in this series of 3 webinars to help our missional imaginations imagine something different. We're still on the same mission to make more disciples of Jesus Christ, to transform the world. But how we do it now looks different, at least it does for me. Each episode has featured a pastor of a large church, a smaller church, and a coach or consultant who works with several churches. If you're watching on Facebook right now, would you take a moment and share this webinar so your friends can have the opportunity to join in it too? Come on, you can do it. Do it right now. Just share that Facebook page. Start a watch party. Don't keep this webinar to yourself. Share it with your fellow church leaders and members of your Facebook page. So don't forget as well that this is going to be interactive. You can post your comments or your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom or in the comments of Facebook. And our Reach Resources executive producer, Leslie Schneider. Are you in the background there, Leslie? Leslie's going to be following those and moderating the Q&A later in this webinar. So let me begin by introducing our panelists today. Our first panelist is Michael Beck. Michael is the co-pastor of Wildwood United Methodist Church with his wife Jill in Florida, and he is a pioneer in the Fresh Expressions movement. Michael, I thought that our church in a pub and church in a diner was out there, and then I saw this video about your church in a tattoo parlor. And recently I saw all your actual tats up and your ink up and down your arm there. But that's not the only thing. You got like dog park church, you got, and I mean, it's just like one and. So I think right now we're all pioneers, whether we know it or not. All of our churches are about 2 months old.
Right.
So who better to help us understand what it means to pioneer a movement of churches in unique forms and locations than Michael Beck. Michael's also the author of Deep Roots, Wild Branches, a field guide to Methodist Fresh Expressions, and a co-author of the upcoming Issachar's Secret with Leonard Sweet. Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Our second panelist is Olu Brown. Olu is the founding pastor of the multicultural and fast-growing Impact Church in Atlanta, Georgia. He is also the author of several books, including 0 to 80, Leadership Directions from Moses, and recently 4D Impact, Smashing Barriers Like a Smart Church. I think you're going to have to now write a new book that's something like 5D Impact, smashing everything that you knew about church and doing it again. Olu was a keynote speaker at a Reach Summit. I think it was 2 years ago that you joined us up here in Michigan, Olu. And I interviewed you on a podcast episode of our Reach Resources, which people can find at reachresources.org. Olu, we are so grateful for you joining us today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Our third panelist may be actually the best known face-to-face here in Michigan. Cathy is a worship coach and consultant working with new starts in existing churches. And she has worked, how many churches have you worked with in Michigan, Cathy? I mean, a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to count. So many. Mm-hmm.
Cathy is also the author of Missional Worship and Building Worship Bridges. She has worked with our Michigan conference for several years, developing a network group to help churches launch a new worship service to reach new people. And I'll tell you what, the people, Cathy, that are in my network group are often referencing you and things they learned from you. And we seem to be sort of a tag team, even though not like necessarily side by side, but people are taking what you're learning in your network and what they're learning in mine, and they're making things happen.
We should do that intentionally sometime.
We should. Well, we are today. Thank you for giving us your time and your wisdom today. So I'm going to start here with a question that's kind kind of against the grain of the way that we've set this whole webinar up. And that is that there are some things that are still not different. There's some things that are the same. So what's not different about the world and the church, and what's the same as it always has been? Cathy, we're going to let you take this. You're going to lead off for us here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so, I thought a lot about this, and of course I wondered, you had me go first. I wondered if you were looking for something like super encouraging. I'm not sure this is going to be that, but anyway, so here's my thoughts on this, which is, first of all, what's the same? We're still the church, and that has not changed. And we're still called to make new disciples of Jesus Christ as really the driving force of everything that we do. The focus, the energy behind everything. Church leadership is still difficult. And, people
Hold
don't
on, you mean it didn't used to be easy, Cathy?
It's still the same. I mean, it's still hard, and people don't always have the drive and the energy to do the work of the church that, and I often wonder why that is, but I see a lot of discouragement, in people. And, it's like the fire has to come from somewhere to be able to do this and endure change. For me, worship is still central to church life. And I mean, my answer to this question really comes from my paradigm is worship and outreach are joined at the hip. And you have vibrant worship when you're thinking about people besides yourself. And when your focus is on making new disciples that, you're called to bring into a context where they're going to participate in worship because they're growing in that faith. And, so it's like this whole big thing. And it still comes in many different forms and sizes, and online worship is one of those viable forms.
Yeah.
And it's a really significant thing. I mean, that's actually sort of a new piece, but it's really not, because it's been around for a while. And, I listened to a Dave Kinnaman and Carrie Newhoff podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about this and how many new people will attend online before they attend in live space. That's not new. That's been going on a long time. And most churches, because they still don't tie worship to outreach, I think they don't really recognize the value and opportunity that online worship, presents to them.
Yeah. I loved how you said,
ahead.
That we were still wrestling with worship being for somebody other than just ourselves.
Yeah.
It reminds me, so I have this mug, and, mugs put the picture of what you want to see towards you. And I'm always holding it in my left hand when I'm on these webinars so that people see the logo of Sycamore Creek. But this, like Leslie and I were like, this is an example of how churches do worship, is
exactly
so that you can see the logo rather than just turn the mug around.
Yeah.
But this is kind of awkward to hold it in my left hand.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I wonder a lot with pastors is, I often see just an incredible reticence to just talk about faith, to talk about who they are, to be that person kind of in all situations. And so the things that you have to do to hold your cup in your left hand, are just absolutely foreign and scary and just such a stretch. And this has just been going on this is what I am seeing out there with churches. And, churches are still behind in technology. We still don't have budgets for tech upgrades and staff. So it's really, it makes it difficult to do this work. And, our target is still locals, it's still the people in our own backyard. And so these are all things that I see as the same, that, and also the world is hurting, still hurting, has been hurting for a long time, but it's a whole new hurting now, the incredible loss that people are experiencing. And, the opportunity to show people where Jesus is and all this is huge. And, I'm still seeing people doing the same thing that they do in their, trying to recreate worship from their worship space into online. And it's just like, shoehorning it in. Yeah.
All right. Well, Cathy, you've gotten us on base, and Olu's up to bat now. So Olu, what's the same? What hasn't changed?
Well, continuing the words of Cathy, very wise, the Great Commission, Matthew 28, go into all the world, making disciples of Jesus Christ. And so that is still consistent, and that is still the church. As Cathy said, we are still the church, and the Great Commission is still alive. Now, how we reach the world has slightly adjusted, but that was even before COVID-19. through introduction of modernization and technology. So the Great Commission for me is still the same. How we do that, and I'll be honest with you, we even have a better opportunity in some ways of reaching more people even now, because the access that you normally would not have to individuals because of Saturday morning soccer games, because of gymnastics and all of the other programming for children and adults that we have, or going out, movies. Now people are centralized in one place.
Yeah.
And so they're much more willing to hear. Now it needs to be quality and it needs to be relevant and it needs to have content. But I would say we're in a much better position over these last couple of months to see the Great Commission happen than we have been in some time.
Yeah, that's something I've noted. There's just not the same competition for people's time. There's different competition right now, so to speak, but it's really opened up sort of people's schedules. I just think even like of scheduling this with the three of you, that not that pastors like all of a sudden are like have wide open schedules, but
I'm not traveling anymore, I can tell you that.
yeah, scheduling coaching meetings with my coach has been easy. I'm like, how about 11 o'clock next Tuesday? And he's like, yep, I'm not anywhere. So Michael, you're down actually in Wildwood, Florida, where actually I'm not quite sure where Wildwood is, but my family members in Florida have been attending my services up here in Michigan, and they've been flaunting it by sending me pictures of them in their backyard pool in their lanai with my picture on the screen. This was while it was still snowing up here. So tell us what's not different about the world right now, besides that my brother's watching my service in his pool in Florida.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I think what's not different is, Jesus said, on this rock, I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So there's nothing in the world, under the world, above the world that can stop the Church of Jesus Christ. And some key things that he said was, I'll build it. Like, you get to be the ingredients of it. You get to be the building blocks of this living organism, spirit-filled thing called the church. But I'll build it and nothing can stop it. And I believe that's true now and always will be in COVID-19, pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, that the Church of Jesus Christ will never die. And that the world is still hurting and broken. And people are in a place of isolation. That has not changed. And the Church of Jesus, we can give the world the one gift that only we can give. And that's communal life with Jesus that can heal our fragmentation and our isolation and our fear. And that, I believe, will never change. Now, I do believe the form that the church takes was, and always will be changing. And we're seeing that maybe on a massive scale right now. Like, the future came in the night and we're here now, overnight. And overnight, we've all had to become fresh expression pioneering, as you said. And I feel like we've been kind of a little bit of a canary in the mind, in the mind of, some change is coming, everybody. Let's find different ways to be church. But that, Jesus gives us the old wineskin, the new wineskin, so that I think the gospel, the content, the person of Jesus, his life, that's the same, right? But the delivery mechanisms, how we deliver that to the world, is always kind of changing.
Yeah, I think I wanted to really start with these points because there really is a lot that is the same. There's a lot that's different, and that's what we're going to talk about. But those sort of foundational bedrock things, it's just helpful to remember that. Even if it's just like what Cathy was saying at the beginning, that it was hard before, and now it's still hard. It's just hard in a different way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you've been working your biceps in the gym for, a couple months, and then you start working your triceps and you're like, oh my gosh, these things, I have muscles there that I have to work hard on. So let's turn our attention to what is different. And there are so many topics to discuss here about the church. There's leadership, connecting with people, worshiping online, worshiping in homes, discipleship when you're not face-to-face, evangelism, how you attract a crowd when it's dangerous to be in a crowd right now, or you can't be in a crowd larger than 10 people, serving and volunteering in the church. I mean, I found like that the number of people that it takes for me to lead a worship service, it feels like it's shrunk, and now we're trying to figure out how to get it back out. Like, how do you do that? Outreach and mission into the community to meet the needs of our neighbors. Again, like Cathy said so well, how we communicate as preachers through a screen, and how we as churches communicate with one another digitally, how you have your home phone going off in the background while you're recording a webinar, how you nurture stewardship and generosity. I mean, those are all things that this is the playing field, so to speak, of church leadership. And we still have those things before us, but they're different. Now, we don't expect every panelist to hit on every single one of those areas, but we would love for each of you to pick one or two of them and show us where you've seen some really effective adaptation in your sphere of influence. And maybe that's in your own church, or maybe it's, I know, Cathy, you're coaching several churches. Michael, you've got this whole like network of Fresh Expressions. We've invited you on because you tend to be on at least the front side of that bell curve of adaptation. So we're going to start with Olu. Olu, where have you seen that effective adaptation right now in the last 2 months?
Well, there's a local church not too far from ours, and I would pass the church just about every day on the way to our church, and it has the typical kiosk billboard outside with the name of the pastor and name of the church. But there was one thing that was consistently missing, and that was when worship happens, the worship times. And so, of course, as a church planner, I'm losing my mind. I'm like, that is a no-no. You have to let people know when you're starting worship at least. And so this had been consistent for some years. And now in COVID-19, you pass by and there's virtually nothing on the sign except join us live on Facebook. And so you have a church that makes a major leap from having no listing of when worship is starting. And you got to remember, this is a major street, so quite a bit of cars are passing by every day. I see it as a great opportunity for evangelism. Now to listing, we're on live Facebook, Sundays, catch us. And so a great win for that church. It's an adaptation as it relates to technology. And a lot of clergy colleagues who historically had shied away from video or audio webcasts are now with their cell phones, pointing towards a chair in their kitchen, or some may still be in the church, not with a group of people, but they're there and the cell phone is pointing towards the pulpit, and they're literally broadcasting around the world their messages, their stories, and who they are. And so I see that as a tremendous win for the kingdom, a tremendous win for technology, and a tremendous win for adaptation. And I'll say this to people who are checking this out: what we're discovering, people aren't necessarily looking for excellence in video. They're just looking for authenticity in video. And if you can put yourself out there with whatever the mistakes you may think may be, people will overlook that. They're much more concerned that you went through the effort to still reach them in the midst of this global pandemic. So that's one form of adaptation I'm seeing.
Your comment there reminds me, like, one of our most popular services in the last 2 months was our Easter sunrise service in a graveyard, which usually like a bunch of us gather there. This year it was just me walking around with my cell phone in front of me, taking a selfie of myself, like telling the Easter story in a graveyard as the sun rose. And we had all kinds of people, including a friend of mine that I've invited to church several times. And every time I bring it up, he goes real quiet. But he actually shared that service on his Facebook page and said, "Hey, my friend Tom doing this unique thing in the graveyard."
It's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, so that shift, of course, to digital, and it can be simple. Cathy, I heard you sort of chime in on Olu's authenticity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I've got a couple small churches that I'm working with, and I mean, and like I'm trying to help them reorganize how they do stuff and refocus their stuff. But I mean, there's some of it I just would never change because it is so real. Perfect for who they are, for their setting, all the major heart that goes behind it, quality good enough, I think there's some missing pieces, which I'll talk about when I get to my thing, but yeah, the authenticity piece. And I went to Olu's website this morning and saw something on there that I thought was just fabulous. Very authentic.
What did you see?
Thank you.
Oh, it was your, the guy, the thing where they did the Zoom, like the whole big Zoom, like, everybody in their own square, and they were singing an Easter song, and your worship leader, I'm assuming that was your worship leader, and he starts out and he's talking, and it was Prince's tune. I will die for you. And they're singing, Jesus died for you. And of course I live in Minneapolis and I'm a Prince groupie, but I mean, it was so good. It was so good. I mean,
Although
it just
you
was
probably
really
have
great.
you have sort of perhaps more than the average United Methodist Church technological advancement. Just give us a little peek on kind of some of the ways that you're thinking about how you all have shifted. And actually, you've been doing this for a long time. How do you think about online worship?
Yeah, and for us, we think historically, as it relates to a particular, as some churches would say, a service, we say an experience. But COVID-19 has shifted, and there are churches across the country and the world that are doing a much better job of this. I believe the shift now is not a virtual or web service or experience, but now looking at church virtual. And so now it's growing from, hey, watch us for an hour, we're going to interact with you, to now we're having to discover and develop putting the entire footprint of church online, because there are some people who will never re-enter public domain the way we used to 3 months ago. But there are also some people who never entered 3 months ago, but they will enter in your virtual space. So it's that Great Commission once again.
What's one way, Olu, that you all have put some piece of the footprint of church online besides just the worship event or experience?
For us, we've always practiced small groups, and I'm sure Michael and his church there in Florida have experienced small groups as well. But we never had 100% of the small groups online. So the shift that we've made now is 100% of our small groups are online. Now, post-COVID-19, we'll probably go back to some coffee shops and other meeting places, smaller in nature, but it has been a total shift for us. Earlier today, we had about 25 of those small groups that started meeting yesterday through this week. I'm teaching one of those, and so to have 25 of those going at one time, people are 100% virtual, is a shift for us.
One of the things that I found at our church, and I don't know whether others are experiencing this, but the capacity of my small group leaders to be able to lead a small group, I mean, it's just shrunk. So the number of small group leaders that we had before COVID-19 and has shrunk down in this, as they're all dealing with, I mean, all of us just about have kids or grandkids in our house and trying to just sort of keep their own head above water. Have you found ways to help small group leaders kind of overcome that hurdle of their own challenges and stresses personally to keeping connected with the church in that leadership role?
I want to speak to that too, but go ahead, Olu. Go for it.
No, I was going to pass it on to you. I'm sure you'll have a much better response than I would.
Yeah, so like our wicked problem, what we've been trying to figure out is releasing the priesthood of all believers. And so in institutional religion, we've created an artificial ecosystem where people come to be spoon-fed by the professional minister, their religious goods and services. So we've been trying to crack the code of how do we make church accessible to all people, because the attractional model of church is not accessible to most people in a postmodern society. And how do we release the whole people of God in their daily rhythms, practices, things that they would already be doing? So for those that aren't familiar with the Fresh Expressions model, the idea is you already gather with people in the dog park on Saturdays. How does that become a form of church where you introduce prayer and scripture and worshiping Jesus? You already do yoga practice on Fridays. So we've tried to not ask people to do above, like, come back to the compound and do things or lead a small group. Or I know Olu has incredible small group ministry and home group ministry and church in the house. And so what we've done is try to equip and empower our lay persons who we say, are baptized, ordained in the waters of their baptisms to be ministers of the gospel in the world. So there hasn't been a whole lot of shift in that department because people were kind of already prepared for that, and this was already kind of their thing that they were giving to the church, if you will. But what COVID-19 has done to us is it's taken away all our first, second, and third places. So the first place is the home space, second place, workspace, school space, third space is those neutral places where people gather for communion and fellowship. The third place used to be the church. People would gather there for community and such, not so much in a secularized post-Christian society. So all those are closed, like tattoo parlors closed. Moe's Southwest Girls doing takeout only. So these are high touch, small group, in a space. So all of that was eliminated. So what this has exposed is in some ways kind of a superficial level of discipleship. And we practice a belonging before believing journey. So that means everybody can be kind of come, and wherever you are in the journey, you can be part of the community. You may not be Christian yet. You might certainly not be Christian and don't want to be, but you can still participate in this thing. Mm-hmm. And so now with the loss of those spaces and the loss of those practices, it has created that effect that you're talking about, Tom, where there's fewer people to do the work and more of us trying to figure that out digitally.
So you're affirming the problem.
Yes, I'm affirming the problem and affirming that it's essentially the same problem where we thought we were doing something fresh and new and creative and missional. It's essentially the same problem that the attractional church has, because you're still dependent on a space and you're still dependent on, lots of things that are just have been eliminated in COVID-19.
Yeah. It seems like where that discipleship is happening in my church on a deeper level are where people did have a kind of deeper covenantal relationship with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's like they have continued to sustain that through this because the covenant has bound them together, even though they don't feel like it and don't have the energy to do it. It's like the monk getting up out of bed at 3 a.m. for whatever that prayer service was at 3 a.m. That's just what we do, whether we like it or not. But if you didn't have that kind of level of commitment before to a small group, it feels like it's been harder to sort of create that.
Yes.
Michael, are there other places where you've seen some adaptation? I mean, we just talked about small groups, but another place where you might want to hit on?
Well, I love what both Olu and Cathy said about just the authenticity piece. We're a church that has no full-time staff and no full-time clergy. My wife and I are both part-time. We both gig on the side and do lots of other things. So we don't have a tech person that's paid to do anything. And the great gift of this has been using free technologies and basically running a whole church of 300 people with a laptop and an iPhone. And no staff, but because it is a dispersed, distributed leadership model, all of our people are using our platforms in creative ways and doing that. But I think what we've done is we've just seen this like we see all worship. I love what Cathy said, that evangelism and worship are totally connected. Outreach and worship, we need to see that as a manifestation of mission. So we're not doing the sit back in the sanctuary thing, and no offense to anybody who is doing that. We call ours living room church. So we're just sitting in our living room, low tech, low production quality, but high engagement. And we just found like people all over the country, like your brother, who are visiting our worship every Sunday and starting to tithe and starting to get really engaged in the life of the church. So we said, how do we turn views, like it's great that you have thousands of views, but does that translate to any kind of relational capital or any kind of, how deep and authentic really is that? So we started talking about how do we turn views into actual members And then these are people that are probably never going to physically visit our church. And I know online pastors been doing this for a long time. But for us, it's just a new thing that we figured out. We created this new membership category called Network Partners. And we just joined a dozen folks into our worship service digitally, and we just have them come on. They're in their living rooms, we're in our living rooms, and they do a remix version of the membership vows of the Methodist Church and join our digital church. So I think that's what we're really trying to think about, is this is great energy and views and new people that we're reaching all the time, but how do we actually take deeper steps of relationship with that?
Yeah, I have a partnership class this Saturday. We call it partnership rather than membership.
Yeah.
And it's not people that we've connected with since COVID-19, but it was people that we had connected with before that. But thinking about how to do a partnership class online, it's like Olu said, taking the footprint of the church where you would meet in a room for, several hours. Like we're not just going to be in a 6-hour Zoom meeting through partnership class. So how we do that. And I am kind of excited about thinking about then how do we do the whole partnership vows online in our worship service. Cathy, you have a unique sort of vantage point because you're working with lots of churches.
Right.
And and you're not necessarily working with churches that are known for being on the front edge or the cutting edge of everything. I mean, they're hiring you partly to help them traverse that hill.
Right.
Where are you seeing some kind of creative adaptation across those churches?
Yeah, well, here's how I went at this question, which was from a little bit more practical or technical perspective than the other two, although fascinated especially by what Michael was saying, and had tons of thoughts this morning as I was thinking about this, about the future of the church, and people that are doing just online churches and actually having a worldwide church. And what does mission actually look like? What does outreach look like, as you have people coming to worship together in one location, but living, thousands of miles apart? How does a church count that? How does a denomination count, nickels and noses with that type of thing? But anyway, my world is still trying to help churches do things in a real practical practitioner kind of a way. So, as I've been thinking about this, I've come up with 3 areas that I think are major shifts that churches are going to have to come to terms with. And one is, most churches still are trying to think of how they're going to go back into their worship space, and when they get back there, live stream their worship and just put it online. And I just don't think that's going to work. So I think one of the things with Olu's church this morning is that whole song that I watched, that was done specifically for online. And I think the shift is churches are going to have to figure out, how do we do online worship and adapt it to our building versus the other way around?
Cathy, one of the things that strikes me about that is we've thought about getting back into our space. And of course, the challenges we've all heard about singing, corporate singing.
Right.
We may still be making videos that were created for online sort of format and playing them in the space rather than all of us singing out loud.
Yeah. So I've been talking to congregations about that for 5 years and tried to help them figure out, how do you make a music video? Because they're actually very easy to do, and that's exactly what I thought. With Olu's thing, if they had that online, that's something they could show in the worship space. And I mean, it's just very engaging, kind of thing. And then the other thing, two more things. One is the next one, how quickly you have to engage people, because how quickly people log on and log off. Yes. And the entire service is an entry point for a person. So what does quality look like for your target? And how do you do something that actually helps people make a connection with you fast? Because, and my opinion, so it's just an opinion, but this one church that I tend to go to a lot online in my area, they just have great preaching, and that's why I go. But I'm not engaged by the music, even though it is incredibly high quality. I'm way more engaged by a lot of this home stuff that I'm seeing churches do. And my sense of the many unchurched people that I know, they don't really care that much about the music. What they care about is what the point of your service is, and how long does it take for churches to get to that point. It's like they're it's like forever. And so online behavior, we're not really recognizing that's going to have to change. And then the third thing is like, how do you staff specifically for online? I think churches are going to have to do that. Like worship leaders forever were not paid for the same way that organists and choir directors were paid, and that's still a problem in some churches. And I think that's also true with technology. And churches have to come to terms with the fact that technology is not going away. It's continuing to impact our world. And I'm amazed by what Michael is doing, because I'd say most church leaders don't have the capacity or the knowledge to be able to do what he's doing, and that to have those technical chops, and if it was me doing the church, I couldn't do it. I mean, the learning curve for me is I'm doing all these videos, and it's like, for training purposes, and it's an incredible learning curve for me. So, so I'd say those are the three areas. And when where I'm seeing the progress is churches that have done that. Two things: that one is churches that I'm working with that are doing that are kind of having a lot of fun with it and doing actually really well, stepping up the whole engaging quickly and shifting how they're thinking about worship. And then the other thing is churches that are really prepared for this are the ones that had their vision kind of down. They kind of knew who they were before entering into this. So like this one church, I just talked with the pastor yesterday, and the incredible community engagement stuff that they're doing that has not stopped. That's what we're about.
One of the things, Cathy, I've noticed about that community engagement is that if you didn't have the relationships before you went online, they don't just materialize out of nowhere online. So you don't get online and at least right now. I mean, I haven't quite figured out yet how to build new relationships online.
Yeah.
I'm getting sort of a glimpse of it, but the direction that your community engagement flows is in the direction of the relationships you had offline.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I did see that, but the thing that I think is also true, and I had a conversation with somebody I'm coaching yesterday about this topic. It's a little bit of a different scenario, but it's like nobody needs anybody's permission to reach out to somebody to ask them how they're doing right now in this incredible time of loss, and it's like you as a pastor, if you're doing that, and how do you get your people to do that? How do we all do that and actually just be kind to people right now?
Yeah, I was talking with on the, what is it? I have a daily-ish podcast that we do each day now, and called Our Daily Shelter. And this is one of the ways I've been getting to know new people, is because I invite these guests on this podcast in the community. I was talking to one who leads a child sexual abuse survivor foundation here in Lansing. And I said, what do we do? Like, how do we do this? And she said, you already knew some kids and some teenagers. Just send them a text.
Yeah.
Like, just build that.
Exactly.
And I was like, that's so simple.
Yeah.
Like, we all know some kids.
Right.
All right. Well, hey, friends, our panelists have been talking. They probably spurred some questions that you have. Leslie Schneider, our executive producer, is paying attention to those, both in the Facebook section, in the chat, and in the Q&A here on Zoom. So I found that in these webinars that people don't actually type them in until we get to this point. So I still have lots of questions that I can ask, but maybe you have some questions. Leslie, I'm not on Facebook, so I don't know what people are asking out there. Anything that you want to bring to our group here? Leslie, are you there?
Sorry, I dropped out for a moment.
That's all right. Hey, are there any questions that people have posted on Facebook or here in the chat or the Q&A?
Yes, actually there are. Let's see. We have several people who are asking, what ideas and best practices do you have for home churches? Maybe they're or models that people are using for home churches.
That seems like a Michael question. When you say, Michael, that you're doing, church in your living room or home church, tell us more about what that looks like.
Sure. So I want to say I do think that relationships can form in the digital space. It takes some creativity, and I think one thing we need to think about is that we have emerging generations, and Manuel Castells talks about real virtuality. So for maybe those of us that are like 80s babies and beyond, we had access to technology and stuff, but for emerging generations, there's not that clear delineation between what's real and virtual. Actually, virtual is real. And so we're trying to plug into that and just try to spread out how we engage people through the week. And we pray and we ask, what is the need that people are experiencing? So for instance, home discipleship resources. Like all of a sudden, I'm now my children's teacher and their youth pastor and everything else. And there's no like pawning them off to somebody for that, right? That we pay to do that. So how do we give people the tools they need to do that? So that's something we started. Then we created this thing called Supper Table Church. So like we're parents, we're with our kids all day. We're trying not to kill them some days. So how do we give a little bit of relief and maybe an adult conversation? So we just encourage people, put a screen up at your table, make dinner, sit down at this time. We're going to have a Zoom, sit around the supper table together and have supper table church. We started connecting with people all over the country by doing that. And it's more conversational. We're sharing each other's stories. And then we started, having like themed supper table nights. So we're going to have taco night and Italian night next week. And we're actually building relationship in digital space. And then some of those folks said, you know what, I think I'm a wild one. I think I'm a member of this church. So that's when we started to ask the questions of, okay, so what does that look like now? We don't really have a category, as Cathy said, for this in a denomination. But I think spreading it out, using those technologies, not to present something, but to hear each other's hearts and to have conversations and to get to know one another and slip out of that presentation mode. Tom, I love what you did by just turning the cup around. That'll preach. Like that metaphor right there will go all day long. It's more like that. It's more shifting rather than we have this content or this stuff we want to give you. Like we're in isolation. We need each other. So let's have conversations. And if we can be creative in how we create space for that.
Michael, something that strikes me about that is I think that a lot of us think of digital interaction the way that this is happening right now. Like we have, again, like it's content delivery, but really like there could be this digital reaction where you're talking about where, instead of me sitting in a chair, I'm back here, messing around with stuff in my living room or in my bedroom. I'm folding my whatever this is, blanket while we're having a conversation. I have the computer open and I'm doing something else, but I'm interacting with you. And I think to that like Facebook portal device where you just would set it up and it'd follow you around while you're in your kitchen cooking and you're chatting to somebody like they're right there. And that's not a digital content delivery. But it's a, hey, we're interacting while we're doing this together.
Yeah, that's good because you really just brought me into your world. And rather than thinking of, I'm just giving this monologue in front of a thing that's going to go out to people, I'm treating it like, hey, what's your name? How are you today? Like we're right here. Talk to me. And this gives us access to literally be in people's real life space every day.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than just trying to funnel them back to some building on Sunday mornings. And nothing against, we'll get back to that. And I'm longing for that too. But this is a way for us really like come into my world and let's get to know each other.
This Sunday for our Memorial Day weekend service, we're calling it Picnic in Place. And we've got about 10 families in our church. So we're going to go live to their kitchen table. And they've each pre-recorded like a 2-minute video of how God has been at work in their life in these 2 months. And so we'll greet them live at their table and then play that video and then come back to them live at their table and kind of progress through it. It's our version of a love feast. We think that phrase love feast has other connotations out in the culture, so we don't really want to jump into.
That's right.
So we've called it picnic in place. But some families might be like on their back deck or in their backyard, wherever they can get internet connection and join us across a meal. Hey, Leslie, are there other questions out there that people are asking?
Yeah, what you just said, Tom, is related to somebody's question about how you adapt the meet and eat for a virtual mode. So it's a combination of video and live.
Yeah, so if you're, I'm curious about this myself, how you've seen people or have welcomed new people into the space, whether there's a sort of, what have you all done? Like sometimes a pizza with a pastor, or like a meeting where somebody get to sit down and chat with a pastor or a leader in the church. Where have you seen, or how have you all adapted that? I'm gonna kick that to Olu.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. For us, we do a monthly small group or care group, we call it. And of course, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so this coming Sunday, in addition to it being the holiday weekend, we're speaking towards mental health and mental health awareness. But that care team, which normally would happen, or care meeting, which normally would happen on campus, now is happening virtually. And of course, gives other people introduction to that. And so although it's not a pastor necessarily, or me as the lead pastor, it's individuals who are sharing in that, whether it's a therapist or care pastor and other individuals. And so it helps to decentralize the model of what it means to come together as a group, but it also is embracing technology and sharing great information with people who may be struggling. And to be honest with you, with the subject of this month's care meeting, having it virtual, you may actually have more people to look at it than you would if it was, hey, meet us Thursday night at Impact Church and we'll have some refreshments, and then, we're all in a circle together talking about mental health, where it would be well attended, but who knows who would not have come because they were anxious about being face-to-face talking about something that's very personal to them.
Sure.
Yeah, we did a mental health, faith and mental health webinar very early on. I don't know if you all, like, I grew up hearing this idea, like from, I guess it was Karl Barth, who talked about you preach the Bible on the one hand and the newspaper in the other.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like as I've been a preacher, I preach with the Bible on the one hand and a psychology textbook in the other. And maybe that's because I was a psychology undergrad. So anyway, mental health issues are really always present in my mind. But to what you said, Olu, like the tail end of these things, if you record them and put them out there, is longer than, we say it's the tail is longer than the nose.
Mm-hmm.
The live event, like right now, what we're doing live here is the nose. We've got so many live viewers, but the tail of it, of people who watch this, and they won't watch the whole thing. We've been pondering. We've used a lot of like sports talk show, Dan Patrick sort of stuff as metaphors for how we think about community right now. And my worship leader, who does a lot of this stuff, he's like, they do a cut down where they take 3 hours and cut it down to 30 minutes of like the Dan Patrick show. And I've wondered about the same thing, but that goes back to Cathy, where you're saying it takes somebody like the technology and so on to cut that down so that you have an even longer tail of whatever it is you've taken the time to create.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one note to Cathy's point earlier about these three emphasis that churches are facing: how to return, how do we quickly engage people, and then ramping up for staff online. If you go back to her first point, how do we return, that is going to be one of the major differences, because what we've discovered, we can do more with less in COVID-19. And what has happened from our worship experience standpoint, I was looking at our experience this past Sunday, and it was less than an hour. Now, our typical worship experience in person is 1 hour and 15 minutes, which can be brief to some faith communities. But we're having worship less than an hour. So imagine then going back face to face and people are saying, well, hey, preacher, you did it, in 40 minutes online. What's going on? Why is this ballooned to an hour and 30? And so we're really having to evaluate content now. With the average attention span of somebody being 7 seconds, you can see them disconnect very quickly in a digital space. Of course, they may or may not walk out of your church. Some churches they will, but so that's going to be something, to Cathy's point, we've got to think about, and how you talk about packaging. We really have to give a lot of thought to packaging worship. And I don't mean to over secularize worship, but it's something we've got to give a lot of thought about.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Olu, like how long is your service online?
We're averaging at the most 40 minutes. And yeah.
Why did it shrink?
Well, we're doing pre-recorded worship. And so we're recording the segments. And to be honest with you, my sermons are much shorter. Not that they were longer when we were face to face, but I discovered, and Michael, it would be interesting to see your thoughts, and Tom, as well, as you're preaching every week. I thrive on people and the response of people. Yeah. And so I'm sitting in my kitchen with a video camera, and it's me. So I'm making my points and I'm moving on. So in part it's me, and in our worship music too as well has been condensed.
Because one of the thoughts that I've had, like if you try to analyze that, which is, by the way, back up, why I listened to that Dave Kinnaman and Carrie Nieuwhof podcast, is because, Dave Kinnaman has just done all sorts of research now on hits and online behavior, and, how long people stay on. And, there's just tons of statistics. And the thing that I thought was, it's like, with the way people behave online, you could still have an hour service and people will make it short in terms of just how they behave, because they'll log on to your service, then they'll go log on to somebody else's, then they'll come back to your service. So, a lot of churches have been asking the question, should we make it shorter online? And it's like, well, for what reason? So I was just curious about that.
We've made ours actually longer, and I can explain why, but I'm curious how Michael has what you all have done.
Yeah, I love what's been shared so far, and we've learned too that people are not going to stare at the same screen for more than like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you don't have some kind of transition to somebody else, so we're breaking it up with different living rooms in live worship with our worship leader in her living room, and then we cut somebody else, then Pastor Eric prays. So we're just doing a lot of movement, and we're doing a sermonic conversation. And from the very beginning, like when we come on, we're saying, hey, what's your name? Comment, drop in the thing. Hey, what do y'all think about this? Weigh in. Can we get some emojis on this? Some likes, loves. So the whole thing is not like we're going to present this to you, but hey, we're with you here. Talk to us. Let's have some interaction. And there's different spaces where people can bring into the service their own thoughts and stuff. And we're bringing. Then the sermonic conversation. I read this. I'm following kind of Steve Jobs, the presentation secrets of Steve Jobs. No longer than 10 minutes, right? So we'll do a sermonic lead, and we have a preaching team that's mostly lay people with a couple clergy in the institutional sense. But so that you have up to a 10-minute lead, and then you design some questions, and there's questions a lot like what you're doing right now, Tom, to engage people that are out and then people on the team. So then they'll weigh in on that. So then it breaks it up, and there's movement, and everybody's getting a chance to feed back into it rather than, so we stay about an hour still.
So I just wanted to comment on that because, like I've been trying to come up with so here's a way you could do it if you're going to really focus on how you engage people quickly. Here's one approach. And I'm doing a webinar with Gary Stepp on this in 2 weeks in your conference, Tom. And I got a couple teaching videos on that. And it's like the general concept is a fine one, but what I love about what you said is your model looks completely different than what I came up with. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're engaging people fast, and it's personal. And so, that's what, there's probably I don't know how many ways there would be to engage people quickly, but that's what you have to think about. And I just really like your model.
I feel like I could keep talking forever with the three of you and picking your brains on all kinds of little details. And really, I wanted to pull these together. This is my dirty little secret, is I just wanted to talk to the three of you and get ideas. And it turns out that a lot of people are interested in listening to that conversation. So thank you for indulging me for the last hour. But friends, will you join me in thanking God for Olu, Cathy, and Michael? Show them some love in the comments section of Facebook or here in the chat on Zoom. And if you know somebody who could use this webinar, you'll find it on the Reach Summit Facebook page, and you can share it with them, or just share it on your timeline for others to gain some help in thinking about how to be the church different. The Reach team is still working hard to build a movement of churches that grow and multiply. So be sure to check out some of these resources that we provide. Of course, there's our Facebook page, Reach Summit, or facebook.com/Reach Summit MI. If you like that page right now, you're already there if you're watching it on that format. Like the page, and then you will just be in the know of what all is happening. And you can access all three of the recordings of these different webinars if you missed them. You can share them with your friends. We began in week 1 with George Acevedo, Kim Griffith, and Mark Opperly. And then last week we had the chance to talk to John Ferguson, Rachel Gilmore, and Eric Keeb.
Wow.
And again, you can find all three of those on the Facebook page that we have here. Be sure to check out reachresources.org. It's a monthly podcast where I interview a pastor, author, consultant, or coach from some area of ministry. That's just an audio podcast. And I don't know, this would be a whole other conversation about when do we just engage audio only versus visual? But I know that I engage both, and sometimes I just want to listen to audio and don't want to watch something. So you'll find those audio only podcasts at reachresources.org. Right now we have 28 episodes. They cover topics from fresh expressions to vital mergers, and from taking a sabbatical to starting a dinner church. You'll also find audio versions of each of these church different webinars on reachresources.org. So if you just want the audio version, it's maybe something you're driving in the car and just want to listen to audio, you can find those at reachresources.org. So don't miss that catalog of great conversations. Be sure as well to check out reachsummit.org, where you can stay up to date about our annual Reach Summit in the fall. Right now, we're in the brainstorming stage about whether this Reach Summit, actually, I can tell you it's going to be online now. We're past the brainstorming stage. We're in the brainstorming stage of how we're going to make it online. But we don't have all the details yet. So keep in the know at reachsummit.org. Thank you so much for taking a step toward being a church different in a different world. I want to end with a favorite prayer of mine. It's from the Book of Common Prayer. And I first was introduced to this prayer by a friend of mine in seminary who had multiple sclerosis and was training to be an Episcopal priest. You'll see why when we get into this prayer. But I think that it's a prayer that's even more appropriate for the context that we find ourselves in today. I'm going to put it on here on the screen, and you can just pray along out loud or silently wherever you find yourself at. This is another day, O Lord. I know not what it will bring forth, but make me ready, Lord, for whatever it may be. If I am to stand up, help me to stand bravely. If I am to sit still, help me to sit quietly. And if I am to lie low, help me to do it patiently. If I am to do nothing, let me do it gallantly. If I am to preach on Facebook, help me do it with the Spirit. Make these words more than words and give me the Spirit of Jesus. And all who agreed said, Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, friends, thank you so much for joining us. There's no graceful way to end these. I wish there was. I just hit the end button and it ends. So thank you, Cathy.
Bye,
thank
everybody.
you, Michael. Thank you,
Thank
Olu.
you.
Bye-bye.
Peace
Bye.
out, everybody.
Thank you, guys. It was great learning from you all.
Same.
Same here.